Hello and welcome to the big picture. Going against opinions of all pollsters and the general sentiment, elections in the United Kingdom has thrown up a huge surprise, with Prime Minister David Cameron-led Conservative Party winning a majority in the 635-member House of Commons. Till even late last evening when the polling was on, the prediction was that it would be a dead heat between the Conservatives and Labour Party led by Ed Miliband, and that the Scottish National Party would play a key role in government formation. Almost like what we saw last year in India, the Tories surprised all to win what looks a comfortable simple majority, which would mean it need not depend on any other party to form the government, unlike in 2010. The virtual wipeout of Liberal Democrats who were part of the outgoing Alliance government and the poor showing of Labour in Scotland are also some of the highlights. Today we will look at the results and how and why Tories pulled off this surprise result, what role the non-white votes, including the Indian votes, have played, and what kind of an impact this would have on the future of United Kingdom as well as its politics. To discuss this, I have with me Meera Shankar, former ambassador, Dipankar De Sarkar, a senior journalist and former European correspondent for Hindustan Times, Professor Gulshan Sachdeva, Centre for European Studies at the JNU, and on the phone line from London is Hasan Surur, former UK correspondent for The Hindu and a veteran journalist. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Surur, you think, how do you look at these results? Till last night we were all told that it's going to be a dead heat, and the people of United Kingdom have surprised all.
Yeah, I mean the exit poll, the BBC exit poll actually sort of came as a big surprise to everybody, and nobody was believing it. Everybody thought that the exit poll was actually, because it was exactly the opposite of what all the polls have been saying all these months. Yeah, everybody, I presume even the Conservatives were taken by surprise, just as the BJP was taken by surprise last year by the scale of its victory. So I think Britain is going through a Modi moment actually.
So Cameron is going through a Modi moment. That's what you're saying.
Yeah.
And, we will come to how and why of it. If you can please stay on. Meera Shankar?
I can't stay for too long, yeah.
So, no, Mr. I'll come back to you. Hasan, please just stay on for 10 minutes. I'll come back to you.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Meera Shankar?
Well, it is
Modi movement,
yes,
actually.
Yes, in a sense, because it's a surprise. Everybody was predicting a shaky coalition of one or the other party because the election was being seen as too close to call.
Right.
With both the major parties, Labour and the Conservatives, in a dead heat. But I think what has swung it in some sense is really the Scottish National Party's big win in Scotland, with the Conservatives able to focus on that and the implications that this would have, where a party which in a sense...
So when you say Conservatives focusing on that, focusing on what? On Scotland?
On Scotland, saying that if the Scottish National Party wins so many seats and becomes the third largest party, then a party which wanted to actually break away from the Union will decide what England's policies should be if the Labour is voted to power. Because Labour was not being seen as having the support to come on their own, and they were seen as losing seats in Scotland, and therefore the best option for them was to really have a government supported by the Scottish National Party from outside. But this rubbed against English nationalism.
It rubbed against... let me get Hasan Surur back on this because he needs to leave. Mr. Surur, would you agree with what Mr. Meera Shankar is saying? Is it Scotland which seems to have decided?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the Tories' scaremongering tactics also worked in the sense that they said that the SNP would be in the driver's seat, and and it rubbed against English nationalism. Yeah, she's absolutely right. I think that's and they focused on that right through, whereas Labour didn't have any counter narrative. And I think SNP also made a mistake by constantly saying that we would do this, and that we would actually be driving the minority Labour government. So I think it's while SNP sort of over-egged the thing, and so Tories were able to sell this idea that SNP would actually be in power, whereas, just driving the Labour government.
Okay, but if as far as the the non-white vote is concerned, there was this general feeling in the past that at least the South Asian vote, the Indian votes were, largely with the Labour. You think that situation has changed in this election?
Well, it's too early. I don't know. I mean, there has not been any kind of breakup analysis so far of who voted for whom. But yes, I think there has been a shift. The the Asian vote has shifted towards the Tories. But I mean, it's not very clear. I mean, so far there has been no analysis. I mean, I can't say for sure, but obviously it must have weighed in. It did matter, I think.
Okay. Please stay on, Hassan. I'll come back to you. Yes.
I think Prime Minister Cameron made a determined pitch to cultivate the Indian. British community. And since many of them have become much more wealthy than when they first immigrated to the UK,
right.
They're not, now solidly behind Labour.
They're not really the working class which they used to be.
One can't say to what extent it shifted, but clearly the way in which they used to vote solidly behind Labour, maybe there's a shift in that.
It's fewer than before.
I'll come to you. Yeah. So what do you Gulshan?
Well, in fact, there are a couple of issues now which this particular election have thrown.
The Conservatives coming back, which was, which was seen as a 50, not even a 50-50 thing. Yeah. Now, coming back in such strength on its own, this is something which is going to make a lot of difference.
Well, it will make a difference because, I think one major factor which has really played a very important role is the Scottish nationalism. And this has not just played a role in the election. I think the impact is going to be felt in the coming years as well. Because, now, because there's a landslide by SNP in Scotland,
yes.
And the Labour was really down because of that. Now, after this, now they're going to be, as in fact Mr. Cameron has promised, in-out exit. a Brexit from that kind of referendum, which he has to have now before 2017. So that, of course, the promise which he has to keep. But at the same time, the Scotland or the SNP, they basically would like very much to be part of the EU. So in that particular context, I mean, if, say, for example, if tomorrow there is a hypothetical situation in which Britain basically decides to go out of EU, at the same time, Scotland would like to be part within the EU.
These are future issues, but we'll try to stick to the election results as such. Dipankar, how do you look at this? Did you expect anything different?
Well, having spent 30 years
yes.
in the UK,
yeah.
I would say this is the single most surprising election result that I've
Somebody is comparing it to Thatcher's defeat, and
Thatcher's defeat
and
no, it's bigger than Thatcher's.
It's bigger than that.
It's as big as Thatcher coming to power. Because this has. You were talking about. I just want to briefly return to your Indian population.
No. If you first finish, we'll come back to the Indian thing later.
Okay. Why do I say it's bigger? Because Cameron has now established himself against the run of opinion polls, against the run of political commentary, as a leading conservative figure, the leading first conservative figure of the 21st century.
Right.
And to come back from a coalition where the Conservatives were hand in glove with the Liberal Democrats. Political philosophies that you would thought were virtually irreconcilable. To now enjoy his Modi moment, as you quite correctly called it, is phenomenal. It's absolutely phenomenal.
So that is one thing. As far as the the emergence of David Cameron in the next 5 years, he may be seen as as big as what Thatcher used to be. If he takes it, if he plays his cards right. But what is it that you think brought this kind of a result?
Well, there are several factors, and we must here talk about the failings of the Labour Party under Ed Miliband. Where Tony Blair took Labour was in this vast swathe of the centrist ground, the center ground in British politics. He virtually snatched it off John Major. And,
Right.
you know, from there to Gordon Brown to Ed Miliband has seen a steady shift to the left. And to my mind, it's too early to say, as Hassan correctly said, it's quite possible that the British voter is in the mood for a much more modern left party. Whereas Ed Miliband wasn't that modern left leader in the way we are looking at
more of
Italy.
a conservative left.
Yes, yes. We're seeing slight and Cameron was able to play on that fear quite correctly, and also as Ambassador Mira said, Shankar said, he was able to play on the fear of a splittist Scottish party. You know, what will UK look like without Scotland tomorrow? You know, apart from the fact that you don't get your whiskey, you know, or it's more expensive. So there was some of that fear play, you know, this kind of playing up on the fear.
Cameron played on the fear of the...
Absolutely, in the last leg of the campaign, and he's entitled to do that. You know, any election that is very closely fought, including the Indian election,
Right.
the last minute is always, do you really want those guys back? You know, that's always
And
there.
in fact,
Yeah.
the UK press had nicknamed Ed Miliband Red Ed, you know, which already, you know, is kind of pejorative in terms of the way in which they shape his image in the media. And he was seen as far too much of the traditional Union left rather than New Labour, which Tony Blair or, you know, which Clinton, in a sense, with his Democratic Party, tried to do to move the agenda to the center and absorb many of the pro-market principles which the Republicans or, let's say, the Tories in the UK had been the main proponents of. So they made a mixed, a mixed agenda, which included, you know, reshaping welfare, but maintaining it to have it more effective, but also more...
We don't know enough about Ed Miliband's economic
Yes.
policies, as it were, because he didn't say enough.
Yes.
What we do know is that when he succeeded Gordon Brown, he went back to the trade unions.
Yes.
Something
That's
that Tony Blair had distanced himself from without actually, you know, divorcing himself from that, because that is your
base.
moorings of labor.
Gulshan, from what both of them are saying, so the people of UK feel that, you know, David Cameron is a conservative, but, you know, he's more acceptable than what Ed Miliband was trying to project himself as. And as Dipankar was pointing out, they don't want the left, or, you know, who seem to be too leftist, to be in power.
Well, this is in fact, you know, quite interesting development, because otherwise, if you can see what is happening in Europe.
Exactly.
Because, you know, otherwise most of the leftist parties are actually gaining ground, because there is actually economic slowdown in many other parts. In one side, you're also having the rightist parties, but you also, the left is gaining ground to some extent, because when you have a slowdown in economic scenario, at the same time, all kind of austerity measures everywhere. So one would have actually expected Labour to actually gain from this.
Exactly.
And at the same time, even in this uncertain times in Europe, and Cameron is actually saying that I might actually take, you know, UK out of European Union, which is a kind of a big risk, I mean, you are taking. Despite that, somehow I think the voters have decided that it's safe to be with conservatives, with some kind of whatever the policies they have, rather than going back to policies with all kind of unknown or populist policies with the Labour Party, which might hurt in the long run. So that was also perhaps the reason that it was pretty too close, I mean, in that sense. I mean,
is that the message,
happening.
Dipankar, people are sending?
Well, I would first of all, while agreeing with some of that, I would say that, you know, the difference between, for instance, Greece and the UK are very stark in terms of...
Not just Greece, but overall, other countries as well. Yeah.
Does the UK voter, is it a rejection of the hard left? Yes, it is a rejection of that. Is Ed Miliband the hard left? You know, that I'm not entirely convinced was because he didn't, he didn't really tell us that much.
No, his agenda was, you know, he said, I will reshape. I will reshape and reinvigorate the NHS, which the Conservatives are going to wind up. A little bit of higher taxes. They
was
aren't.
there no clarity in
Well,
his...
there aren't.
Well, this is where the scare tactics
I
come
will
in.
reduce tuition fees. I mean, I think the kind of agenda that Ed Miliband had put forward
the Murdoch
was
press.
very, it wasn't that kind of a radical agenda.
No, it wasn't.
It
Which
was
is
a
why
kind
it's
of
so interesting.
tweaking the social policies
The Murdoch
agenda.
press came out with its usual tabloid, let it loose on the Labour Party.
Right.
So in spite of the fact that, as Ambassador Shankar was saying, he wasn't as far to the left as a lot of people imagine him to
as
be.
he was projected to be.
He was projected to be. That's right.
And coming
I
to the
think
liberal...
let me say the third factor
Yes.
perhaps was that the UK economy has, after a severe downturn in the last 2 years, has bounced back and even, and has been performing relatively better than its European peers.
Right.
No.
Exactly.
If you look at France, if you look at Italy, if you look at others, the UK economy, and you have to take it that it's from a very severe and savage downturn, but nevertheless it rebounded and was doing better comparatively than other European economies.
Okay, and coming to the Liberal Democrats, I want all three of you to respond to this. What happened? Here is this party, which, as you said right at the beginning, unimaginable for them to have gone and joined hands with Conservatives. 5 years, they get wiped out virtually.
Well, my very short, I mean, it's too early to say, but my take is that if you are a party wedded to liberal ideologies and principles and founded on those principles, then think twice, thrice, 4 times before joining hands with the right-wing party.
Right.
Because you cannot take your voters...
We have seen this happening in India.
We have indeed. But I spoke to teenagers in the UK who were natural Lib Dems. You cannot think of a 19-year-old, voting for Tories, and Labour wasn't quite fitting in. They were natural Lib Dems. The moment these guys imposed university tuition fees, they said, well, I mean, this is not the Liberal Party. And this is a part of it. The young must have voted with their feet.
Gulshan?
Well, I think I think he's right, because when you are a different ideology, if you are not able to keep, I mean, this has been happening, as you mentioned, in India and many other countries as well. Slowly and slowly you may become big, but the moment you become part of some other major kind of mainstream party,
it swallows you up.
It swallows you up. This is what Congress used to do in India, and even BJP may do later on in some other parts
it's already done.
It's already done
Yes.
in some parts of India. So they're exactly the same thing as
Veera
happened
Shankar?
here.
Yeah, I would agree with the previous analysis, because the Liberal Democrats are paying a heavy price
Huge price.
for having partnered with the Conservatives and then departed from their own agenda in the interest of expediency. So they are seen as not having, adhered to the ideas which they propound.
Their founding ideas.
And so, in a sense, they've become irrelevant. You see that in Germany also, where the FDP was in a coalition with the CDU, and then now, because of basically accepting the CDU's policies, I think the FDP has become a much smaller player. It used to be called the tail which wagged the dog,
Right.
because both the SPD and the CDU...
Which the Liberal Democrats did in the last 5 years,
Yes.
or supposed to have done at least.
Yes, but no longer. And of course, I think the other interesting thing is that UKIP posed far less of a challenge to the Conservatives than they were being built up to be. In the European elections, the elections to the European Parliament, they'd done very well. They'd done much better than expected in local elections. And there was this question, just as the Scottish National Party will eat into the votes of Labour, will UKIP eat into the votes of the Conservatives, but they've got only one seat.
They've got only one seat. They've also been completely wiped out.
It is quite possible. Yes, I mean, indeed, their leader, Nigel Farage, has lost.
Yes.
And I dare say that most political parties, mainly in the UK, would be very relieved by that news. Because nobody wanted to even share the same platform with this man.
With the UK Independent Party.
With the UK Independent Party. But my fear is that to a certain extent, the UKIP, it came second in some silver medalists in many constituencies. It may have eaten into actually Labour votes. Because there is a rump of the UK working class that is nervous about immigration, and the UKIP was able to play on that.
I was reading that they won quite a lot of votes actually. UKIP has won a lot of votes, but not seats.
4 million votes,
yes.
Which is more than SNP.
Absolutely. And okay, now coming to the issue of Indian voters there. We are told that there are roughly about over 6 lakh Indian voters in UK.
Yes.
Well, that's a figure.
Yes. Well, this is being described as the election with the biggest Indian angle to it ever. The biggest Indian diaspora election in the UK ever.
Yes.
It's absolutely true. You can't quibble with the numbers. The number of Indian origin people in the UK is about 1.7 million, which makes it the largest by far. There were about 59 candidates of Indian origin. Prime Minister Cameron has at least 2 Indians in his cabinet, Sajid and Preeti Patel, and I dare say that there's this question that you asked at the very start about Labour support, Indian support for Labour moving. I dare say that a number of these fence-sitters would have included many Indian origin people as well, who would have voted for Tories at the last minute among the rest of the population.
No, is this shift an ideological shift? Is this shift something which has happened, which you can't compare to the Indians of the 1950s or 60s or 70s also?
What is ideology and not is very difficult to play. You were a Punjabi farmer one day and the Labour Party government in the UK called you saying, we need you. You came there.
Yeah.
Now, are you a Labour Party because you are left-wing, or are you a Labour Party because they gave you a job and, you were able to make your future out there?
Right.
Very difficult to say. But it is true that Labour so far has been the natural, the home for Indians. There's no doubt about it. They were the party that backed India's independence, if we go back. Some 60% of Indian voters in 2010 voted for Labour.
Exactly.
And that may well have come down to, who knows? I
think it will be divided probably between the two parties, but this is a natural. But
the attraction towards the Labour has.
I think this is a natural. Could I say this is a natural progression for those who become wealthy, because they want to see lower taxes. So when you talk about ideology, we've seen this
you see in America also.
Yes, we've seen this in the US with all those with high levels of income. Many of them tend to move towards the Republicans.
Right.
And those who are in academia, in the intellectual world, journalists and others, very often move towards the Democrats. So it's not as though the community votes as one bloc. And then it depends on the candidate, it depends on the issues. So I think they'll become more like normal voters within the UK, rather than
to think of themselves as a separate community, actually. What is this BAME thing? B-A-M-E, is there a vote bank? There has been a lot of discussion there. I'll come to you before. Gulshan? The blacks, ethnic minorities and the Asians and...
Well, to some extent, these things do work in all elections. It might have worked in British elections as well. But I think, as we are discussing, rightly pointed out by other panelists, the composition of all these communities are also changing. I mean, the kind of Indian community, what used to be in the 60s, 70s, even up to early 80s, is changed. I mean, now you have professionals, now you have more educated, more in the middle class, upper middle class. So obviously their aspirations are different. Their understanding, their ideological, points are different. So they are like voters of any other country. But yes, overall, still there might be tilt towards Labour Party, but composition has changed.
What's new is that the Conservatives have made a very conscious effort to woo these communities, which they didn't in the past.
Why didn't they do it in the past, Dipankar? Why was it not done in the past, and when did they realize that they have to do this?
I would slightly rephrase that by saying that they weren't energetic enough, because quite simply the numbers weren't that big. Secondly, they probably thought it's not worth their time. You know, I mean, you have finite time and resources.
Where Indians or Asians, if you take the Bangladeshis and the Pakistanis together, were they not as political as they are now? Have they become more political now?
They've always been political. I mean, starting with Dadabhai Naoroji. So you know, I mean, the Indian political influence has electrified British politics through down the decades. That is not the point. The point is whether the Conservatives felt they were able to reach out to people who are from ethnic minorities, who looked at them very suspiciously for very right reasons. For, you know, it was a fairly racist society. Let's not forget that. Let's not forget that.
It is still. Some people say it is still a racist society.
I would not. Agree
you wouldn't say that.
I wouldn't say that at all. I mean,
but conservative parties, you know, that image of being a white man's party is no more there.
It's not at all. I mean, as I said, but the important thing is this: with looking at the Indian diaspora, the younger generation of, let us say, the Gujarati shopkeeper who has saved very hard, put his son or daughter through university education. That younger generation may not necessarily go with their parents.
Okay.
They will go with the Tories. They have tended to vote with the Tories, while their parents are voting for Labour.
Yeah. Gulshan?
Well, that's true. I mean, we are discussing that the composition is changing. But, you know, another one point perhaps we haven't really discussed, you know, the way the elections take place in the UK and in other parts in Europe, like all of the smaller parties are kind of wiped out,
yes,
you know, in this kind of system like we have. But at the same time, you know, if you look at the same numbers, if percentage they would have got in Germany or France and other countries, you know, all these, political parties, whether UKIP or whether, you know, Greens or others.
The number of UKIP votes.
Yeah, so they would, you know, their numbers would have been much higher in the parliament. So I think the debate again would be, I mean, the whole thing would be debated in Europe again, I guess, to some extent, particularly in the UK. Is it really good? Or it's, I mean, to some extent, I think it has served some purpose because you can keep many of those parties which actually create a lot of problems otherwise for the society at the margins. But at the same time, they are not fully represented.
That debate is happening in India, always keeps happening in India. Very quickly, we're running out of time, all three of you quickly. It is said that this election is going to reshape not just politics, UK itself. How do you think that will happen?
I'm not sure how it will reshape UK itself, but there are, I mean,
because
looking
the Scottish National Party's results.
Looking to the future, I think the question of the Scottish question, if one may say that, will loom large because there are policy differences between the SNP and the Conservatives. The SNP wants to give more emphasis to welfare and to supportive policies. The Conservatives want austerity. On immigration, the SNP welcomes immigration. They've said that they would again reinstate the rule to allow Indian students to work for 2 years after finishing their degree, and they are for being in Europe. Whereas on immigration, the Conservatives are far tougher. On economic policy, there are differences.
Conservatives have a majority. And Dipankar, very quick last word. No,
this can sharpen the
differences. Very quickly, last words to you. You think the Scottish nationalism, which has come to the fore now, will reshape the way the UK politics?
Absolutely. I think we're looking at a nation growing up. Even at this late stage in history, I think we are looking at the UK becoming a more federal state. And maybe it should look at India to learn how to manage it. And the good news there is, Prime Minister Modi is going to the UK this year, and there's a good likelihood that Prime Minister Cameron will come to India this year.
Okay, I think on that note we need to end. Sorry, we completely run out of time. It's been very interesting elections. As all my panelists say, that this is something which nobody expected it to happen, and how it will all turn out, we'll have to wait and watch. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the Big Picture, same time on Monday. Meanwhile, have a great weekend.